Witch podcast. Hope you are all well, witches. It is so good to be back. I've been away for a little while. Last time we were here, I was about to take a break to go to Lincoln. Since then, I caught COVID for a second time, along with all my family. Had a wobbly, was considering staying in my hometown. However, I'm so excited to say I pick up the keys to my new house in Lincoln this week. The update that nobody asked for. My new house is set in a tiny little village outside the city that is reminiscent of one of those villages on a British murder mystery. Think John Nettles in the 90s on Midsummer Murders. This is what I've been aspiring to for years without the murder. I will never fathom how that tiny British countryside village on that TV show can afford to lose so many villagers. I have a brand new house I'm moving into that has this old rambling windmill next to it. There are fields across the road, actual fields with badgers and hedgehogs and all sorts. I can't begin to tell you how excited I am. I need to give a massive shout out to my girl Kerry. She really helped me out with finding my dream home. All the love to you, my darling. I'm so grateful that you are my friend. You might wonder, why are we on season 4? We could have started this a bit later, perhaps when the move was done. But genuinely, it felt right to get into a new season because I feel like I am in a completely different place to when we finished up season 3, so on our last episode. I recognise now I needed a break purely for inspiration. A new direction to take the podcast in, nothing too far removed from where we were, just some additional topics that we could perhaps look at. These last few weeks have hit me right in the chops when it comes to shadow work. I remember saying on the podcast not long ago that I hadn't delved into anything like shadow work on the podcast for a while, as I was happy and it didn't feel relevant to where I was at. So I wouldn't feel I could really get into it and do it justice. But buckle up, witches. Shit, have I got issues that I feel we can all relate to. And you know it wouldn't be the White Witch podcast if we didn't end up talking shadow work in the summer. The universe clearly heard me cockily say that and thought, girl, time for you to have some fucking hard lessons mixed in with some blessings. I will never understand why this stuff comes up for me in the summer months when I'm meant to be living my hot witch life, but here we are. Shadow work is for life, not just for Christmas. I felt today's opening episode might ease us in gently for some of our forthcoming episodes. We will have all the pagan type aspects of the show in this season, but I think there are some areas we've never tackled that we could look at together. The more I speak to other witches, the more I realise much of this is a theme for the collective. I might recommend that perhaps when you listen in, you grab a notebook. You might want to take some notes. You could sign up to Patreon. Over there, there'll be 4 grimoire sheets as we go through the season. Before we get into our main episode today, our book review is a real random one. Not one I thought I would bring onto the show, if I'm honest. I thought I could sneakily read it outside of witchy books for the podcast. But damn, this book got my attention. It is so good, I couldn't not tell you about it. It does fall under the supernatural category, so I hope of some relevance to our dark, witchy hearts. Another reason I didn't envisage talking about this book on the podcast is because it's been so popular. I often shy away from books that are all over social media, for fear of it being for the masses and frankly rubbish. But this book, oh my, I can't even tell you how much of a romp it was. The book is My Best Friends Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. When I tell you I spent the entire time reading this book, lost in childhood memories of the 80s, thinking of my mum with her huge blonde perm, driving me and my brother round in her Cortina. I was there in the 80s. If you were born in the 70s or early 80s, this book will be a whole trip down memory lane, I am sure. I had Tiffany's song, I Think We're Alone Now, in my head, Madonna, everything. Here is the book's blurb. High school sophomores Abby and Gretchen have been best friends since 4th grade. But after an evening of skinny dipping goes disastrously wrong, Gretchen begins to act different. She's moody, she's irritable, and bizarre incidents keep happening whenever she's nearby. Abby's investigation leads her to some startling discoveries, and by the time their story reaches its terrifying conclusion, the fate of Abby and Gretchen will be determined by a single question. Is their friendship powerful enough to beat the devil? Like an unholy hybrid of Beaches and The Exorcist, My Best Friends Exorcism blends teen angst, adolescent drama, unspeakable horrors, and a mix of 80s pop songs into a pulse-pounding, supernatural thriller. First thing I need to say off the bat is if you watched the Amazon film of this book, read the book. I waited to watch the film until I'd read it, and it did the book so dirty. Aesthetically, it looked good, but so much of the story and its essence was missing. This book is absolutely wild. I could not put it down. I haven't found a book I love as much since I read this about 3 weeks ago. I cried, laughed a hell of a lot, was petrified in parts, disgusted in others. Overall, though, it made me realise how much I love my friends. I even sent my best friend Alex from school a really soppy message. It just reminded me of our times as teenagers. It will absolutely take you back to the good and bad parts of being a teenager. It is so full of love, ultimately, between two friends. And I guess it's that theme of sometimes love doesn't have to be in the form of romantic relationships. We can have so much love around us in so many other forms that is so intrinsically important. Excuse me whilst I get the sick bucket. But yes, ultimately, this book just made me feel a whole lot of love for my tribe. And lastly, can we just, with the cover, it's giving VHS that you rented from Blockbusters. Fuck, I miss going to Blockbusters with my friends and choosing videos. But yes, the cover is amazing. Following on from reading this book, I'm going to read Grady Hendrix's book, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. So yes, run, don't walk to get a copy of this book. It is worth the hype entirely. Just don't bother so much with the film. That's all I will say. So I'm here recording the podcast in my bedroom, as I have been since it started 3.5 years ago. And I'm excited to say when I move, I'm going to have an entire room all to myself to record in, which is unreal. But for now, I'm sat here in my bedroom burning a beautiful jasmine candle that is adorned with rose quartz, carnelian, rosebuds, and lavender. And I was sent this by the wonderful Wildly in Tune within one of their ritual boxes for Beltane. I love it so much. I wanted to tell you about the box that I received. I'm all for supporting good witchy businesses, especially as I'm a small witchy business owner myself. The Wildly in Tune Rituals box contains monthly items to support spiritual wellness for busy witches just like us. Working mums, perhaps, those who find it hard to make time and space to heal, listen to their intuition and connect with their divine feminine and the universe. So this box arrives to your door every month and corresponds to the season and lunar cycle. Your box contains beautifully curated products such as mindful crafts, books and stationery for journaling and manifesting, candles and jewellery. 6 and 12 month subscriptions currently have 25% off. Boxes are shipped at the end of the month in time for the month ahead, and you lovely listeners can order the summer solstice box up to the 12th of June. Order at www.wildlyintune.co.uk. Follow them on Instagram at wildlyintune_. I will put their details in the show notes for you to see too. So, coming back to talking about season 4 of the podcast, it felt quite poignant to catch up with my good friend Jennifer Lane, author of The Wheel. You will likely remember her episode, which is one of my favourites of the show. She came on to talk about her new book, The Witch's Survival Guide, and themes around connecting with nature, rituals and practices linked to nature, but also managing mindfulness, anxiety, disconnects, and overall well-being, and tying it in with our witchcraft practice. Jen, as ever, offers up some real wisdom and ideas. I wound up taking notes throughout this interview. There was a ton of inspo she gave me, and I hope it might you too. Jennifer Lane is a green witch, author, and distance Reiki healer. She has written for Vogue, The Guardian, and the BBC on how nature and spirituality can support our mental health. Her books, The Wheel, A Witch's Path Back to the Ancient Self, and The Witch's Survival Guide, Spells for Healing from Stress and Burnout, are out now. She's over on Instagram at The Green Witch Writer. Her website is jenniferlanewrites.com. Again, I will leave those in the show notes. When I think of Jennifer, I think of birds. After reading The Wheel, she definitely got me connecting more to the birdies. The music before this interview felt quite fitting. It is called Robin and includes birdsong. It always makes me a bit emotional, as the robin is one of my faves. It reminds me of my nanny Rose, and recently I've had quite a few robins flutter around me, and I've wondered if she might be showing me she is around whilst I go through all these changes. Love her. You can tell I'm emotional. I'm excited to be back, witches. Without further ado, join me after the break to speak with the wonderfully talented Jennifer Lane. Welcome back. I am here with the wonderful Jennifer Lane. Hello, Jennifer. Welcome back.
Hello. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, honoured. I'm so glad to have you back on. You may remember Jennifer from our former episode, The Witch's Guide to Healing, and we have also reviewed her wonderful book, The Wheel. So, Jen, last time we caught up with you, you had released The Wheel, but can you give us some insight into your new book and perhaps ways writing this book might have influenced your craft and lifestyle?
Oh, interesting. So, yes, absolutely. My new book is called The Witch's Survival Guide, Spells for Healing from Stress and Burnout, which I think that many of us can relate to right now. I feel like this is the right time to be talking about this. So I wrote my previous book, The Wheel, back in 2020, had the time during the pandemic, and it was all about my recovery from stress and burnout that I'd experienced in the workplace, and how I came back to my witchcraft practice using the Wheel of the Year. And in that book, that was very much a memoir style that was looking at my direct experiences, going out into nature, communing with the elements and the spirits there. But this book, The Witch's Survival Guide, is a very practical book. It's a guide to using spells and rituals, charms, looking at the elements, and seeing which ones resonate with you. It's a very practical guide to witchcraft and to healing. So it's something that will that can be used by people of all ages, really. I've tried to make it as accessible as possible. So it can be used from like any age, from teenage onwards. If you are experiencing stress at school, at work, these are all ways, very practical tips that you can use to come back to yourself. And you asked about ways that it might have influenced my craft. And I suppose that it's just really made me super conscious of potentially when I am feeling those stressy moments, those things that maybe I would have just skimmed over before and gone, it's fine, just push through it, it's okay. But actually now I feel like, having written this book, I've got all of those tools and resources in one place that I can keep referring back to. So if I do feel like I'm experiencing stress, which, even those of us who've done a lot of inner work, lots of, practical things as well, those moments of stress still rear their ugly head. So I think that it's just very good to be mindful of that, and having those resources at hand is really helpful. So yeah, I definitely found that while writing this book.
Oh, I loved The Wheel, and obviously I've been fortunate enough to get to read your new book, The Witch's Survival Guide. They're both amazing standalone books, but I also think if you read The Wheel, I think it will give you such a great follow-on, because it's like you already gave details in The Wheel of what you did and different rituals and things like that, but this is packed, like, cover to cover, packed of things you can try, not overwhelming, because there's so much explanation on different areas and why you might want to do this. It's all very logical, it all makes sense. And you're right, I think if you are, I know for the podcast, we do obviously get a lot of witches that are, teenagers and so on. But I really read this book thinking, this is great for me as a refresher on quite a few different things, because I don't retain everything in regards to the craft in my brain at all. But it's also great as a reference book for witches that are perhaps, been practicing for longer periods of time. And I really felt like it is a book that I would reach for straight off if I was going through the crap, if the full moon was beating my ass or something of that ilk, I would reach this and think, okay, what can I try? What can I do to help this make this better, or, self-soothe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I've tried to split it into the 4 elements. So really you can choose an element that resonates with you, something that really, really speaks to you. You can sort of dive into that element and choose a spell from there. But yeah, I talk a lot about the moon and like ways that we can cope with those dips that the full moon brings, or the new moon. We were just talking before the podcast, weren't we? Like it's coming up for the full moon now, and I'm just like, oh my god, I really need like a spell jar. So yeah, I think I'll be diving into my own book later just to get myself back up to scratch.
Oh, absolutely the same as you. This full moon is definitely doing it to me. And I think as well, it's really good timing that we're talking about this, because a lot of the theme so obviously we're just starting out with season 4 of the podcast, and a lot of this season to kick off, to begin with, is going to be around shadow work. And it's weird because, we kind of talked on this as well, but shadow work is traditionally, I don't think it's a bit like shadow work is for life, not just for Christmas, but I know that usually it's a time of, sort of Samhain and around the autumn and winter months that we kind of go in. But for me, shadow work always rears its head in full intensity in the summer. And that's kind of why a lot of the themes on the podcast are around this, because a lot has come up for me. I think as a collective it is as well. I think it is a real thing. So I really think a lot of the witches will benefit from this if they're feeling the same, even if it's just for this full moon in general. I think a lot of witches are crying out for this at the moment.
Oh, yes, no, thank you so much.
obviously much of the focus with your book is around the modern world, like pushing a lot of us to breaking point, because sometimes it doesn't really sync with trying to live seasonally, and a lot of the things that us witches do try to focus on, the bigger picture. It looks at burnout, feeling anxious, inadequate, disconnected. What would you say are some of your favorite methods you use within your own life, and perhaps craft to allow you to feel that you've taken back maybe perhaps control, maybe more of a self-soothing nature within your life?
Yeah, so I definitely think there's a crossover. So the things that I do within my life have a certain magical, mystical quality to them as well. But I'm really big into somatics, so sort of moving the body and like finding yourself back in your body when you're feeling very anxious in your head. So like I think I always equate those anxious moments to the element of air taking over, almost like your thoughts racing like the wind. So I always try and ground myself back in my body, and the ways that I've done that over the years, I do a lot of yoga, and I always find that if I'm not practicing yoga, my mental health is a bit shaky, is a bit wobbly, because I need to come back down to earth and into my body, like putting my hands on the earth, through like traditional grounding techniques. But I feel like when I do a child's pose, everything feels okay again.
Yeah.
But I think that some of the other things that I do is so I'm very, very fortunate to live in an area that's very green and leafy, and I can get outside a lot. And I definitely feel again that if I've not left the house that morning, I try to go for a walk before work or at lunchtime. So most of the time I try and do both, because I just feel that the more time I spend outside, the more time I'm not just in my own head. Like I've got so much more that I can look at around me. But yeah, I feel like that nature connection and that tie to my own body is something that really brings me back to myself. But I suppose within my witchcraft practice, I follow the moon, as many witches do. So at a new moon, I do that manifestation, and I use it as like a check-in point of the month. So I use like the new moon and the full moon as specific times when I can actually say to myself, okay, how has it been over the past few weeks? That kind of lunar clock almost, just to say like, what do I need to do for the coming weeks to make myself feel better? So I think that even though it's not really like a spell, like if I'm doing manifestation, yes, of course that is a ritual that can be used as part of my witchcraft practice, but actually just using those lunar points as check-ins I think can be really helpful, just so you can see your progress and see where you need to go to moving forward.
Absolutely. We're literally given two opportunities, aren't we? What do I need to end, let go of? What do I want to bring in? I think that's the magic of the the full and the new moon, and using those as a tracking method, really, and checking in with yourself. But I also love, obviously we've got Live around the corner. I always love, as witches, if you are a witch who works with the Sabbaths, that we've got those as well. It's like we have a plethora of different ways and things we can use within our year to check in with ourselves and see where we're at, and what we want to achieve and do, and so on.
100%. I think that that's what I did within the wheel. So the wheel, a witch's path back to the ancient self, I used those sabbats, the 8 spokes on the wheel of the year, as those kind of check-in points. And I used the immense power that comes at those times of year to sort of harness that, and for my own mental and physical well-being. So yeah, I think that even though we live in this quite technologically advanced society where we can have like an app that pings every hour and that reminds us to drink water, or reminds us to go for a walk, I think that doesn't really have the same effect as using the cyclical effects of the seasons and the lunar cycle to bring us back to ourselves. Like the modern world is going way too fast for us, in my opinion, and I think that a lot of us can relate to feeling very drained at the end of the day, feeling like we've just run a marathon, like every time we come home from work, because the office environment is not built for everybody, even though we're taught that it is something that we should all like aspire to work in. And I think that modern environment, that modern world, is just so fast that we need to come back to ourselves and, you know, look at the seasonal calendar. I think that nature is there to live with us, not against us.
I really relate to that. I feel like in some respects I'm trying to adopt I'm a witch 300 years ago without getting burnt at the stake, but I'm trying to, does that make sense? I'm trying to like go back into not being on my phone as much as I can, and it's really hard because it's like you want to balance the sort of living cyclically and you know, living by the seasons, working with nature and so on, and not, for me, like there's little things that I do, and actually some of our listeners might relate to this. I think I'm absolutely bonkers. Like with social media, I do love social media, but I get onto it and I get sucked into the hole. So I've done little things like I take it off of my phone until I need to actually use it, or I'll kind of go onto my laptop and log on, which sounds absolutely bonkers, but there's little things that I've had to kind of create that make me a bit more in the present, because I've got a very overactive mind, and if I get onto them, I'm just there, I just lose a day or something.
Absolutely. You know, I wanted to just jump in there and say, oh my God, I relate so much to that. I like, even though I love this, like the idea of seasonal living, it can be so difficult because we've created this structure in the modern world that relies on social media interaction, let's keep in touch with our friends, but also like business opportunities. You know, if you're working in that kind of environment, social media is like so vital almost if we want to socialize and progress in the world. So it's no wonder that we get sucked into like the little dopamine hits that come with social media. I think it really is quite tricky to navigate that, even as a witch, as someone who's, you know, very in tune with the cycles. I need to start doing that. I need to delete it from my phone and just make sure.
Oh, Jen,
it's so
when,
hard.
you know, people, it is so hard. And also people say, oh, I messaged, because I think I emailed you the other day and you're like, I sent you a message on Instagram. I was like, let me it's explaining the whole story of, well, sometimes I, you know, have to download the app if I need to go on it, and it just, people look at you like you're crazy, but it does work for me. And it's not to try to be anti-social or anything like that. It's just, even our brains, like we, you know, the dopamine hit, if you are somebody that's got a very overactive mind, and a lot of us do anyway, or if you want that hit and you get used to it, you just find yourself on it all the time. So you know, just creating little things like that for me. But also, yeah, we can't, you know, we can't, you know, really escape it in a world where most of our careers and our jobs and what we want to do is linked to the internet. It's quite it's a tricky time to navigate, and we've never had this before, so we are all finding and feeling our way as alongside trying to be present and live with, you know, seasonally and with nature and so on. So yeah, what a time to be alive.
Exactly. Yeah, we're all looking for those ritual elements in our lives that, you know, would have been very common for our ancestors, that we've lost over time just with getting swept up in this busyness. So I think that, you know, having those you know, small rituals in our lives, having an altar is just such a wonderful thing as a witch. I mean, I know that you don't have to have one as a pagan or as a witch, but it is a useful space to have in a quiet room of your house that you can go to and be meditative and reflective, and yeah, just come to whenever you're, you know, feeling that you need to settle. Because I know that my altar can sometimes go untouched for quite a while just because of the busyness of modern life. But when I do come to it, it feels almost like a sacred experience being there.
I love that you're so honest about that as well, because I am the same. Sometimes I look at mine and think, oh, I need to, I'll never be that witch that's on there every day. I wish that I was, but you know, it's not for the want of trying, it's just life. And I think it'd be, you know, sometimes I think it's that reality check. But also, I mean, one of the books I read recently, which was great for me in terms of all factors of life, in terms of business, pleasure and so on, and it was Atomic Habits. And I kind of relate this with the altar, because I feel like it's like a visual thing of when you see it there, if you do want to carve out that time to meditate or to kind of work on that aspect of yourself. Just having that sacred space is almost like the prompt for the action of meditating, or I don't know, connecting with your deities and things like that. I really think you can use that altar for that habit of you know, it sounds awful saying habit for a ritual practice, but that creates connection for us. If you are feeling very disconnected and so on, just creating that tiny habit of finding somewhere to go, even if it's outside or something, just that place is that prompt for you to do it.
Absolutely.
In real dark times, one of the first things I find that I need to come back to is, that sounds very dramatic, very dark times, when I'm feeling very disconnected. For me, like I always feel I need to get back in front of my altar, and that starts the whole connection process just with that alone, and then everything else seems to kind of connect in with it too. But there was so much in the book that you know, I was really kind of thinking, oh, I'm going to get back to my usual, you know, getting into rituals and so on. It really inspired me to start getting back there and doing little things daily, maybe building up to some bigger rituals. The thing I loved about the book, and you touched on this, it covered a lot in regards to the elements. We've already talked about air in relation to overthinking and so on. There were so many great different rituals and practices. They were realistic. They weren't like you need the blood of a bat and things like that I think some books can have in them. You know, some witchcraft books, unfortunately, I don't think they're very realistic. I think all of your work has been very. But what was your favorite aspect to research and write about for this book?
So I think that what I enjoyed the most was, because these are all my own rituals that I have created, and they're based on my real experience. So a lot of the spells are dealing with overwhelm and dealing with like negative thoughts, how to stop those. There's one spell in there which is literally just standing on a hillside with your arms open to the element of air and wind and letting it blast your negative emotions away. And I thought, well, what could be better than that? It's so simple. And when you are feeling in that negative headspace, you don't want a complicated ritual. You don't want to go searching for ingredients that you have to like order online and source from a really, you know, quite far away. I've read a lot of books where I'm looking at the ingredients and I'm thinking, I have never even heard of that. That is so obscure. And I just think that, you know, if you are experiencing low mood, depression, anxiety, you want something quick. You want something that's right there in the moment. And I think that being able to step outside and do a simple ritual like that can be, you know, it can be very heartening. Like I've done that. You know, look at me, I'm working towards positive mental health. I'm doing this for myself. And, you know, not having to wait to do things like that. So I think that was something that I really enjoyed about the book, is like creating these almost like immediate rituals and spells that will be helpful for your health. But also, like you said, I enjoyed going back to basics and like looking at the things that I was finding out when I was a teenager. So I've been practicing the craft for, God, dare I say it, 2 decades now. I can't believe it. I was thinking about that the other day going, wow. So I discovered the craft when I was a teenager, and it's just always spoken to me, you know, as a very female-led spiritual path. Like that's always been a huge part of it for me. You know, growing up in a Christian household where it was quite patriarchal, like I always loved having that feminine element in there as well. So I was looking at how to set up an altar, how to, you know, create things with your ritual tools. So it was wonderful to like look at the significance of those tools and like the athame, you know, having the different elements and elementals represented on your altar. But I also enjoyed the simplicity of it, because I think I've said this throughout the book, and I think throughout all my work in general, is that you don't need a lot of tools or ingredients or different items in your life to practice witchcraft. You just need yourself and your intent. And if you do have a bit of clear quartz on you, a few herbs in the background, that's great, because they can all enhance your work. But I think that there's this myth in the pagan community that you need to be dressed to the nines in robes embroidered with runes and symbols, and you just don't really need that. I think that simplicity is key to this, because it helps you focus on your intention and what you want to get out of that ritual.
Oh, absolutely. I'm someone who'll be going in Sainsbury's buying juniper berries in the spice section and things like that. I do not sign up to all the gear form of witchcraft. It's just, over time you end up collecting things, you get given things, but I'm very much no, you do not need if you need very little to get going with it. I think what you said there, it really made me realize that. So my teenage daughter, this is a sort of book that we would share together, because we're at both different stages. Yeah, so I feel like there's very few books that I've come across that I felt like Amelie would benefit from, but I feel like this one would. There's so many different bits covered. I feel like it's a book we could really share together. We actually do a lot of like little rituals together for the moon, for the Sabbaths. And I think this is one that a lot of our witches, if they're parents or guardians, it's a really lovely book that you could enjoy together and kind of show them different parts of the craft that actually have practical things to work on. And then, kind of for witches that have been, like you or I, like have more decades of working on our craft, there's different bits that you could explore together and go further into. But this is like a great outline for everything and where to get started. And, I really think that this is something that would be great for witches for that as well.
Oh, well, that's wonderful to hear, because I have tried to make it as accessible as possible, because I look at those I'm just starting out on my witchcraft journey things, but also there is something in there for more advanced practitioners. That's really beautiful to hear. Thank you for saying that.
I definitely think as well, for myself, even reading this as a witch has been practicing for longer, there were so many bits, and there were lots of bits that I hadn't even thought of or knew of as well. So it is a real combination of the two. But very much a lovely witchcraft book to share. If I'd have been given this when I first started in the craft, oh my goodness, I'd have been salivating, honestly. It would have answered all my questions. Me thinking back to my Silver Raven Wolf books that I shared with my brother as a teen.
Oh, yes. I had all of them. I would devour those things. But I think like you say, there wasn't a book that kind of covered everything, and I think a lot of it was quite in depth as well. There weren't that many how to get started books. It was all like you should know this already, almost like a gatekeeping feeling to it. So this it is for everybody.
There are a lot of books I find that are still out there like that now, but then again, this is very sort of reassuring, very it's logical and it's easy to get going with it as well. And so I pitched, so when I talked to my Patreons that you were coming onto the show, kind of pitched the idea for them if they had any questions that they'd wanted to ask and things like that. So I have got a little question that came from our lovely witches. One of the main takeaways we all agreed on from reading your book within our book club was being more present when we go out for walks in nature. It's really funny. Every time I go on a walk now, I never take my headphones. And this all started with the book. So I used to take the dog out for a walk, once or twice a day. And sometimes I used to have my headphones on, or I'd be on my phone still. I'd be out in nature, walking the dog, glancing at my phone, which is terrible. But anyway, so we're all saying about, it's like leaving your headphones at home, focusing on the birds, plants, trees, and so on. I've now extended this to trying to identify different plants and trees. So we've developed a little bit now, Jen. Since we last had you on, have you any new nature related practices that you've integrated into your life that you'd be happy to share to inspire us once again? And I know you do a lot of work on the bird side of things as well, so I don't know if anything's come up for you there, or any jewels that you're happy to share that we might want to have a go at.
Yeah, so yes, like you say, I'm very into my birds. I did used to work in nature conservation, so I have got birds are very close to my heart, and that's still something that I look at when I'm outside. And as you mentioned, like I try to go out without headphones just so I can fully immerse myself in what's around me. But I'd say that probably the things that have come up for me most are learning new wildflowers. I feel like every year I try and learn at least 2 or 3 more to add to my repertoire. It's slowly getting there. So yeah, I find that I am looking for specific patches of things on my walk. I have like regular routes that I take, and now I can see, oh, there's a patch of dead nettle here, and this I can use this in a spell for joy, or for moving through low mood. And I think that dead nettle is just a wonderful one to add a bit of joy to your life, but it's not one that I discovered really until this year, until writing this book. So it's always a complete and utter wonder and little shot of happiness to ID some more herbs and wildflowers on your walk. So yeah, I think if you've taken that step to stop wearing headphones or stop looking at your phone while you're outside so that you can really, really enjoy what's around you, I think that the next step might be taking an actual ID guide out with you, because once you know where something grows, it tends to grow there year after year, so that you can always come back to it and replenish your herb cupboards, as I tend to do. My conservatory at the moment is just full of dried herbs, and I need to put them in jars at some point, otherwise they're going to get really dusty. So I need to do that. But I think that those ID skills are vital for a witchcraft practice if you want to go down that kind of herbal green witch path. I think that's a really good one.
Oh, I love this, especially about you saying about the ID and plants. And what I live in a town, and the sea is at the end of my road, so we're not known for that kind of climate and so on. It does affect what grows. But this year, especially kind of like after reading the book, I really got into, first of all, it was looking at everything, then it became IDing things, but trying to do it from memory, and then I go back and check things out, and I'm so shocked at witchcraft supplies that you can just find out. Like I found borage, I found dead nettle, I found like dandelions, like there's so many things that are just there, just growing wildly on grass verges, and there's everything that you can there's all manner of things that you can use within your craft, just on the ground, obviously ask for permission and so on. But it always amazes me. Yesterday I went out and found loads of like elderflower, and it's true, like you say, if you know where it is, you'll know where to go back each year. I've started to look more into foraging. That's become my new thing. And now I'm like, oh, there's the blackberries. I'll get those at some point. And, it's just, every time you go out, it starts to become a little like, oh, what prizes can I find?
Yes,
And
I love that.
I love it.
I love that. Prizes. It really, it adds an extra layer to a walk as well. Like you're not just walking for the sake of walking. Like there is a goal to it. Like you've got your eyes on the prize. I had a really distressing experience last autumn, because I was walking past this beautiful, I'd say it was like a 20-foot hedge of rose hips, like almost every day. Like they were roses at that point, and I was like, I need to come back here and harvest some rose hips in the next few days. And when I came back, there was a guy, and he'd picked the whole lot of them. He hadn't left anything for other foragers or birds or anything, and I was just absolutely devastated, because yes, like you say, asking permission is key, from the earth spirits, from the plant itself. But I think that leaving a good portion, I would only ever take like maybe 5 or 10% from an area, because other beings need those resources as well.
I really dislike when people do that. I'm so with you. That's one thing I was going to say. Like I for me, like I take a very small percentage, and I find some people really take the mickey with it. And it's not just, for other people, it's more for the nature, more for the wildlife, for the birds and so on. That's their source of food. It like really infuriates me, because I have seen that around where we are as well. So yes, it is asking for permission, taking a very minimal amount as well, not being greedy. And but yeah, it really upsets me when that happens. Yeah, it's such a shame. It's just thinking about it, you know, compassionately, really. Can I ask you though, Jen? So I did get a little phone ID for IDing some. It kind of did everything, like plants, animals, and so on. And my French bulldog got in the shot when I was trying to identify something, and it was when it came that my French bulldog was a cat that I thought perhaps this app isn't the right one for me to be using. So what do you use or could recommend as an ID type? Is there anything you could recommend as maybe like a book or an app that you like to use on that front?
Yeah, so I don't actually use an app, but I love that your French bulldog was a cat. That's really great. So I have friends who use the apps, and they all seem to be like, the ones that I've seen seem to do quite a good job, but I don't know them off the top of my head. So I have a very old school guidebook, which is an RSPB guidebook that comes with, like, there was a fungi guide, there was like a seashore guide, and then there was this wildflower one. And it's very compact, and I just take it with me wherever I go, really. But I'll always see the best wildflowers when I don't have that book with me. I'm like, oh, why didn't I think to bring it today? But yeah, I do go a bit old school with it, because it also means that I'm not on my phone as much with the apps and everything, so that I can leave my phone at home if I choose to, but I can have this very sort of analog book with me. So yeah, it's just a general RSPB wildflower guide. That's what I'd recommend.
That is absolutely what I was hoping you were going to say, a book, because again, it's the same with the having to take your phone, and it takes you away again from, I think, being present at times. So I will look into that, and there are all some great places that you can buy older books like that. So I'm sure that myself and a lot of our listeners will be able to find copies as well. Some of the old, like, identification books are so beautiful, honestly. You can pick them up in charity shops as well. So yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye out. So this is such a random question, but it is one I want to start asking people, because I asked our Patreons this. We were kind of having, it's based off a book that I read recently, but a lot of us are very much into kind of supernatural programs and, you know, ghosty things and so on. And we talked about it in a humorous nature of, okay, so bear with me on this question. Perhaps if you were, I don't know, like, confronted with a demon, or if you were, I don't know, performing an exorcism, which I'm sure none of us will need to do, hopefully. But I guess this question could apply in terms of more real dire straits in life. So, okay, those times in life when you find yourself kind of falling to your knees, asking the powers that be, or whoever you want to call on, for assistance. So perhaps if you're anxious, or you're in fear, or really having a mental health lapse, if you're happy to share with us, Jen, who or what would be your go-to in those times that are not of this world, and why? And are there any experiences that you have had that you would be happy to share? Please include your exorcism and demon stories, if applicable.
I'm trying to think of all the exorcisms that I've done throughout my life.
Yeah,
so,
we'd love to hear those.
So yeah, I suppose I'll start with a practical thing, because I see, as an animist, as someone who believes that, you know, every natural creation has a soul, is part of this earth, it has a spirit. So I would speak to the stone people, and the first thing that I would do is get a piece of black tourmaline, smoky quartz, black obsidian. I think that surrounding yourself with those protective stones, those you know, the element of earth, is the first thing I would do if I was feeling out of kilter. You know, I was feeling quite stuck in my head, and quite panicked, because I think that even though those are like protective stones, I think they're also very grounding ones as well. So that would be my first point of call. But then I would go into that ritual space. So I wouldn't necessarily like be expelling things from my system, like demons or things, but I would be calling in light. So I'd be calling in positivity, and I would use, well, I would work with the goddess Breed in that. So, or Bridget, or Bridget. I pronounce it as Breed, but she is this virgin Celtic goddess, and she is the bearer of light. So we tend to work with her during the festival of Imbolc or Ostara. You know, she's that spring goddess, but I think also because she carries that torch, she carries that inspiration with her, I think she's a wonderful one for warding off the darkness. So Breed is someone that I come back to throughout the year, no matter where we are in the cycle. She's the goddess I would go to. And I think that many people might say someone like Persephone is the Greek equivalent, because, you know, she's the ruler of the one of the rulers of the underworld. She's got a foot in both camps. She's got one in the real world and the underworld. So she's someone that people can work with to take that dark negative energy back to the underworld with her. So yeah, a wonderful goddess to work with. But Breed is someone that I've worked with for decades now, and I always feel very comfortable with her because I just feel like she gets it. She's got quite a light energy to her. I don't feel like there's any darkness or any dark sides to her. So I think that she's someone that I would return to again and again. But you asked about paranormal experiences, and God, I've had a few recently. I think just throughout life in general, like I think if you are sensitive to these energies, you know, spirits can come through more easily, you know, especially at different times of the year, so Beltane and Samhain. But I think they are just attracted to people who are working with these energies and know how to manipulate them. So I've had ghosts in my house since I was 13 years old. I've experienced the Fae when I've been out for walks and had very strange things happen to me, like being out in the middle of nowhere but hearing cats start meowing around me when there's like nothing around me, and they must know that I'm a huge cat lady, because what they're trying to do is lure me away from the path. They're trying to go and get me to look for cats or kittens when there's obviously nothing there. So yeah, I find those experiences can be quite challenging, and it does make you have a little moment where you think, okay, what is going on here? Is this some kind of like breakdown that I'm having, or am I experiencing something supernatural? So I do tend to always carry protective amulets or stones with me. I always wear my Vesica Piscis, which has an amethyst in the center of it, so it's two circles joined together to represent this world and the next, but they're joined together with this protective amethyst. So that's something that I wear to protect myself on a daily basis. But yes, I don't think there's any escaping the supernatural if you work with witchcraft. It just seems to follow us around.
Absolutely. Honestly, I remember the tale that you said about the cats, hearing the cats in the wheel. I think with the tree and the cat, if that makes I do remember the story of that, though. I'm sure you wrote on that in the book.
Yes, I did. It was a very it was quite a creepy experience, and I still think about it quite a lot because I'm not sure what the Fae were trying to tell me or where they were trying to lead me, whether it was a positive or a negative place, but I got quite a negative feeling.
Yes, and you can tell, can't you? You do pick up on that energy. I mean, I know it sounds a really crazy question to ask. I think that it stemmed from, as you say, us witches, we always find ourselves, you know, really into and interested into the supernatural side of things. But you always watch films and you always see things, and it's always geared towards the Christian church and God. And I know people say God in terms of the universe, but a lot of the times it is a reliance on the Bible and Christianity. And it kept coming up for me like, okay, so what do these perhaps, you know, what do witches do there? Who do they call on when it comes to dealing with these energies? Or it's always been something I've been really interested in, you know, asking witches, who do you go to in those times of need? And yeah, it's always interesting to me. I guess mine would be my spirit guide and my deity. So most often it would be Hecate, because like you were saying about Bridget, I feel like she is that lantern in the dark, and she will open up the path and show you where to go. Obviously she, you know, her links to the crossroads and so on as well. But yeah, that's really interesting to hear. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, our witches definitely need to read the will to hear that story, because I found that quite chilling actually. And I remember reading that thinking it was quite eerie. So Jen, can you tell us more about new projects that you are perhaps working on, or even plans that you might have for your craft. I don't know if there are any specific areas of interest that you might be focusing on at the moment.
Yes, so in terms of my craft, I've actually been, kind of forgoing that the cat experience. I've been very interested in looking at the fae since Beltane. I've been looking at fairy trees, so really about the significance of hawthorn and blackthorn and things like gorse as well. So all these like spiky plants that are associated with fairies because they have that trickster nature. Like they're at one moment they're beautiful and blossoming, but they also have that trickster darker element to them. So I've been really interested in that recently, and that's a piece of research I'm doing. But I have a book out next year that I'm also doing a lot of research for, and that is going to be looking at witches' familiars and how they integrate with the landscape around them. So that book is called Underwing, and that's going to be out October 2024. Had to get my dates right then. So yes, I'm in the middle of doing that at the moment, and there's just some very interesting pieces of research there, so I'm loving that. And also I have another book out in September of this year, so September 2023. I've got my first young adult novel coming out, which is called The Black Air, and it is a modern interpretation of the Pendle Witches.
Oh my goodness.
It's been a busy year, but yes, I've loved writing this book. It's something that I started when I was actually quite young, because I've had this fascination with the Pendle Witches ever since I was in my teens and as a child. So this book, The Black Air, is all about obsessive friendships and this witchcraft legend that permeates this sort of dark northern village, and how it seeps into the consciousness of everyone around. So it's a bit of a chilling thriller, a bit of psychological drama in there, and yeah, I've just absolutely loved writing it.
I didn't know any of this, so this is so exciting. I can't wait for either. They are both right up my street. Wow, you've been a busy bee.
You know what? I need to take some deep breaths. No, it's been a really interesting year. And yeah, I think that also writing the Witch's Survival Guide has come at the right time, because I've been incredibly busy. A lot of us are just so hectic with our jobs, and being able to come back to these spells and rituals is something that keeps nourishing us, even if we do feel a bit depleted. We can always return to witchcraft to hold us and nurture us.
Oh, I know you've been busy, but you can tell how passionate you are about everything you're doing, and you can see it in your work as well. Like I've always, whenever I've read, both of your books, you can really tell how much you love it. So yeah, very, very impressed, honestly. So it brings me to my last question. Obviously, usually one of the last questions we ask on the podcast is the music question, and we went into that on the first episode you came on. But I really wanted to ask you about perhaps maybe books, resources, content creators, YouTubers and so on, that might inspire your own work. And of course, they don't just have to be witchy ones either. For myself, a lot of inspiration comes from all over the place. So I don't know if there's any that you're happy to share with us, but they might have influenced some of the work that you're doing currently as well.
Yes, so I can talk about, I've got two books in mind that have been really, integral over the past year. So I mean, hopefully I didn't mention it on the previous podcast, but I am absolutely obsessed with braiding sweetgrass. I don't know if you've read this book by Robin Wall Kimmerer, but she is I believe she's a professor in America, and she talks about the relationship between humans and the land, and like that historic connection that native peoples had with the earth. And she's been met with a lot of like scientific research saying that we should keep everything very rigid in its box, and it's like Latin terminology, but she is sort of going outside of that and looking at how deep and absolutely intertwined our spirits are with nature, and it's this absolute glorious almost romp through nature, through spirituality, all told through the lens of, you know, her history, which is, you know, she's a First Nation person. So I would really recommend Braiding Sweetgrass as something that's very immersive in nature.
Yes.
And so, yeah, the second book that I've been looking at a lot recently is called Cunning Folk and Familiar Spirits by Emma Wilby. And she does a real deep dive into the history of witches, familiars and demons and spirits in folklore and nature. It's just absolutely fascinating, and it's quite an academic text, but I also find it very accessible. And she does so much research into folklore and, you know, how, again, fairies coming up again, the fae, like how they've sort of seeped into our, like, the popular consciousness. So I'd really recommend that to people who want that more academic approach. So those are two books that I've been absolutely loving recently, because I feel like they've helped add another layer to my craft as well.
Fantastic. I've got Braiding Sweetgrass on my shelf and I still haven't read it, and that has inspired me to pick it up. I've heard of the other one as well, so I'm definitely going to give that a read. But no, thank you. That's fantastic. I think it's always good to get a good recommendation from authors as well, and, you know, to hear what inspires their work and so on. So, Jen, that obviously brings us to the end of having you on. I've loved this. I've picked up so many, like when you came the first time, there's so many bits that I picked up from our conversation today. Where can we find you? And is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap things up?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram, so you can find me at the Green Witch Writer on there, and I post a lot of witchcraft content, but also a lot of my nature travels there, and I am also a Reiki master, a Reiki practitioner, and so you can book in for a distance Reiki session with me there, or you can go to my website, which is jenniferlanewrites.com.
Fantastic. We would love to have you back on Bookback. We'd love to have you back on when your other books come out. All the books are in my head now. So yeah, if you'd be open to coming on, that would be great. We'd love to hear about your new projects. But thank you. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, it really is. I've absolutely loved this. And yes, I'd be more than happy to come back on.